Hello and welcome. Gear up for 30 amazing challenges that will test your brilliance. Why is math important in everyday life? It helps us make decisions. It is only useful for scientists. It is not needed after school. The correct answer is, it helps us make decisions. Here's an interesting fact: math helps us budget money, plan time, and solve problems daily. Which of these activities requires math? Cooking, listening to music, sleeping. The correct answer is cooking. Here's an interesting fact: measuring ingredients correctly in recipes requires math skills. What type of math do you use when shopping? Geometry, probability, addition and subtraction. The correct answer is addition and subtraction. Here's an interesting fact: you use math to calculate total costs and discounts while shopping. How does math help in sports? It helps track scores and statistics. It makes players run faster. It is not used in sports. The correct answer is, it helps track scores and statistics. Here's an interesting fact: math is used to measure speed, angles, and game strategies. Why do architects need math? To design safe buildings, to draw pictures, to write stories. The correct answer is, to design safe buildings. Here's an interesting fact: architects use math to calculate dimensions and ensure buildings are strong. Which profession heavily relies on math? Doctor, musician, pilot. The correct answer is pilot. Here's an interesting fact: pilots use math to calculate flight time, fuel consumption, and altitude. How is math used in telling time? It is not used. By calculating hours and minutes. By guessing the time. The correct answer is, by calculating hours and minutes. Here's an interesting fact: clocks and schedules rely on math to organize time properly. How do businesses use math? For fun. To calculate profits and expenses. To make decorations. The correct answer is, to calculate profits and expenses. Here's an interesting fact: businesses need math to track earnings, costs, and growth. What is the importance of math in technology? It helps create software and AI. It is not used in computers. It only helps scientists. The correct answer is, it helps create software and AI. Here's an interesting fact: coding and programming are based on mathematical logic. How does math help in travel? By measuring distances and costs. By choosing the best destination. It does not help. The correct answer is, by measuring distances and costs. Here's an interesting fact: math helps in calculating travel time, fuel needs, and expenses. Why do engineers need math? To design machines and bridges. To write emails. To paint pictures. The correct answer is, to design machines and bridges. Here's an interesting fact: engineers use math to ensure structures are strong and functional. How is math used in video games? For creating game physics and graphics. Only for counting points. It is not used. The correct answer is, for creating game physics and graphics. Here's an interesting fact: game developers use math for animation, 3D modeling, and game mechanics. How does math help in baking? By measuring ingredients. By choosing cake flavors. It does not help. The correct answer is, by measuring ingredients. Here's an interesting fact: bakers use math to measure flour, sugar, and other ingredients accurately. Which of these careers does not require math? Writer. Astronomer. Accountant. The correct answer is, writer. Here's an interesting fact: while writing uses creativity, most careers use math in some way. What is budgeting? Planning income and expenses. A math trick. Only used by businesses. The correct answer is, planning income and expenses. Here's an interesting fact: budgeting helps people manage their money wisely. How does math help doctors? It helps calculate medicine doses. It helps them talk to patients. It is not used. The correct answer is, it helps calculate medicine doses. Here's an interesting fact: doctors use math to measure correct doses for treatments. How do farmers use math? To measure land and crops. To name animals. To pick colors for barns. The correct answer is, to measure land and crops. Here's an interesting fact: farmers calculate area, crop yields, and market prices using math. How is math used in music? By measuring beats and rhythms. By choosing song lyrics. By selecting instruments. The correct answer is, by measuring beats and rhythms. Here's an interesting fact: musicians use math to count beats and create harmonies. How does math help in weather forecasting? By analyzing data and patterns. By guessing. By watching the sky. The correct answer is by analyzing data and patterns. Here's an interesting fact: meteorologists use math to predict weather conditions accurately. Why is math used in space exploration? To calculate rocket trajectories. To name stars. It is not used. The correct answer is to calculate rocket trajectories. Here's an interesting fact: NASA scientists use math to send spacecraft to planets and beyond. How does math help drivers? By calculating fuel and distances. By choosing music. By looking at maps. The correct answer is by calculating fuel and distances. Here's an interesting fact: drivers use math to estimate travel time, fuel needs, and speed limits. How do artists use math? To create balanced designs. To mix paint. To write songs. The correct answer is to create balanced designs. Here's an interesting fact: artists use math in proportions, symmetry, and perspective. What is probability used for? Predicting chances of events. Only for fun. Writing stories. The correct answer is predicting chances of events. Here's an interesting fact: probability helps in making predictions, like weather forecasts or sports outcomes. How do banks use math? To calculate interest and savings. To decorate buildings. To write news. The correct answer is to calculate interest and savings. Here's an interesting fact: banks use math to manage loans, interest rates, and money transfers. How does math help in medicine? To analyze medical data. To paint hospital walls. It is not used. The correct answer is to analyze medical data. Here's an interesting fact: doctors and scientists use math to track diseases and medical research. How do chefs use fractions? To adjust recipe portions. To taste food. To clean plates. The correct answer is to adjust recipe portions. Here's an interesting fact: chefs use fractions to double or halve recipes. How do construction workers use math? To measure materials and angles. To choose colors. To write signs. The correct answer is to measure materials and angles. Here's an interesting fact: construction workers need math for precise measurements in building projects. What is geometry used for? Measuring shapes and spaces. Counting money. Writing books. The correct answer is measuring shapes and spaces. Here's an interesting fact: geometry helps in designing buildings, roads, and even art. How does math help in fashion design? By measuring fabric and patterns. By choosing colors. By naming brands. The correct answer is by measuring fabric and patterns. Here's an interesting fact: fashion designers use math to ensure correct sizes and proportions. Why do we need math in daily life? To solve everyday problems. Only for school exams. We don't need it. The correct answer is to solve everyday problems. Here's an interesting fact: math helps in shopping, time management, cooking, and more. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Stay tuned for more exciting content, and we'll catch you in the next one.